We're very pleased to welcome Ruth, our first speaker for tonight. It's great to see so many people here. Dr. Ruth Valerio is, this is a mouthful, Global Advocacy and Influencing Director for Tearfund. I'm sure she'll tell us more about that, what that means. Ruth is an environmentalist, theologian, activist. She works to bring lasting change on issues that impact the poorest and most vulnerable global communities. Ruth holds a doctorate from King's College London and 2 honorary doctorates. She's Canon Theologian at Rochester Cathedral, and her home church is part of the 24/7 prayer network. She enjoys living sustainably and practicing what she preaches, inspiring others to do so. Ruth is author of several books, and you'll see them on the stand over there. There's also details of how to pay by electronic means for those books. And that includes an Archbishop of Canterbury's Lent book in 2020, Saying Yes to Life. She's a regular contributor on Radio 4 and the BBC World Service, and co-founder of the Oikos Network, a global network of peer mentoring groups for Christian environmental leaders all over the world. So I'm sure we'll hear more about her work as we invite her to come and speak. Have I missed anything? The group?
No, you're not. I think that's plenty. Thank you. Definitely plenty of an introduction. I'm not quite sure who she's talking about. But it's lovely to be here. Good evening. How nice to see so many faces all smiling at me. Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. As you heard, I live down in Chichester on the south coast, so came over this afternoon, and really great to be here and to start your Lent lectures. I think you've got a great programme over the next few weeks, so I hope I can do justice to that and start it off in a good way. As Pearl, you have to excuse me if I get off my way through this. As Pearl said, I work for Tearfund, and I'm the Global Advocacy and Influence. I won't go into that title. Basically, I oversee the advocacy and campaigning work that we do at Tearfund. You will probably know about Tearfund and the work that we do alongside Christian Aid and CAFOD and others around issues of climate crisis, and also for Tearfund quite a lot on plastic pollution as well and its impacts on people living in poverty. What you see of Tearfund's work on advocacy is really just the tip of the iceberg, and a lot of our work is done in the countries where we work, working with leaders, church leaders, movement builders, to really building up a movement to help the communities that we work in to have their own voice, to speak out on the issues that are important to them. So we do a lot of advocacy and campaigning and policy work around the world, and I also oversee our theology work and quite a large part of our comms teams as well, including the media team and some other parts. So it's a fab job, really focused on building movements to bring about systemic change on the issues that cause poverty. And of course, one of those issues is the climate crisis, which is why one of the reasons why we're here this evening thinking about faith creation and the climate crisis. And I want to start with you in the country called Mali, and with someone who actually I don't have a picture of, but a man called Barima, who's a farmer in Mali. Mali is one of the poorest countries in the world, very vulnerable to climate change. facing acute climate-related challenges from higher temperatures and more frequent extreme weather events. The impact of climate change has led to a rise in food insecurity. That's a very technical term, isn't it? Basically means people are hungry and aren't able to produce or to buy the food that they need. And Mali's economy is suffering. Children aren't able to go into school. Young girls are being forced into marriage at earlier and earlier ages because the families is one way of raising income. A lot of the population in Mali are farmers, and they're battling all of the extremes of climate change that we are facing. Burima is one of the people who we're working with, and he is really facing the impacts in his own life. He's been struggling with low rainfall for his crops, as well as plagues of insects that are causing further destruction on the crops that he is growing. He's been trying a whole number of different ways to grow his crops, but without much success, and so things have got really difficult for him and his family. And I'm going to tell you a bit later about what we've been doing with Burima and the community, the church that he's a part of. So we'll come back to Burima, but you won't be surprised to know that his story is not an isolated one. And we hear constantly through our work at Tearfund the impact that the climate crisis is having on people living in poverty. And I've just put up a few pictures to illustrate both the climate crisis and some of the issues of the wider environmental crisis that we are facing. And there are so many other pictures that I could have put up, aren't there? So many issues that are happening. Dangerous levels of global heating, huge-scale plastic problems, massive biodiversity loss, increased natural disasters, we call them natural, droughts, floodings, hurricanes, typhoons, all causing famine and biodiversity loss, conflict, refugees. I could go on. You're beginning to wish that you hadn't come here this evening, aren't you? God's vision is of a very different world. God's vision is of a world where poverty and inequality don't exist, where everyone has enough and the whole natural world is well cared for. We have come so far in 50 years in terms of tackling poverty, but we are looking like the climate crisis and other environmental problems are pushing people back into poverty. The World Bank estimates that climate change can push 132 million people back into poverty by 2030. 2030 sort of used to sound quite a long way away, you know, but we're getting very close to that 2030 mark. I don't want to spend too long on all of the negative stuff, but sometimes I think it's helpful just to remind ourselves the majority of us here will be living relatively comfortable lives in comparison to some of our global neighbours. And things like the climate crisis can just seem like a theoretical thing on a piece of paper when our global neighbours are actually experiencing these things every day. And so, as uncomfortable as it is helpful for us to be reminded of what is going on in the wider world. And we see a bit of it here, don't we? With our changing weather patterns and the rain. And as I got the train over here, I just went through so much flooding but on the bit between, well, all of the, along the plains. I know some of that's floodplain anyway, but seeing the level of flooding that is currently happening with all of the increased rainfall that we have got. We know that last year was the hottest year on record. Not only the hottest year on record, but every day last year was the hottest day on record. I mean, quite staggering. And every day last year was over 1.5 degrees of where that day would have been with pre-industrial levels. That is a really staggering milestone to have reached. For various technical reasons, it doesn't officially take us over the overall 1.5 threshold, but it gets us a darn sight closer. So our temperatures are increasing. It might not feel like it today, but overall, the last month or so, I'm sure you noticed, this is February, mid to late February. I actually had an evening a few nights ago where I didn't put the heating on at all, didn't feel that I needed it. Would never have had that in February. There's no doubt that things are getting milder. And that's leading to extreme weather events, as the number of weather-related disasters has increased fivefold over the last 50 years. As I said, that's pushing people back into poverty, and we know that inequality is part of that. The richest 1% of humanity is responsible for more carbon emissions than the poorest 66%. This is happening on such an unequal level. And it's those who are the poorest who always suffer the biggest impacts and have the least resilience to be able to cope with changes. Health is being impacted. Climate change is increasing the number of deaths that we're seeing from undernutrition, from malaria, from diarrheal diseases, from heat stress. And we know that our wildlife are suffering as a result. If we've watched any of the Attenborough programmes recently, you'll know now that it's just a constant note all the way through, isn't it? Or any of the spring watch or autumn watch, winter watches, all the way through, we are hearing how our changing weather patterns and the warming temperatures are impacting our wildlife. So we face an unfolding disaster. And at Tearfund, we are convinced that we need to take Jesus' commands and love our neighbours and the whole natural world seriously. And that includes playing our part in the climate emergency. As I've said, our vision, my vision, is for a better future. We want to see people released from extreme poverty, even in communities where climate change is hitting the hardest. And so we're committed to environmental sustainability in everything that we do. That's hard, and we struggle to do that as an organisation. And of course we have our challenges, but we are trying to walk the talk in our programmes and in our advocacy work, in our influencing work. This isn't new for us. We've been doing things around climate for, since 1992, so for many decades. And over the last 20 years or so, this has gained in prominence in the work that we do. We do that through our programmatic work and through our campaigning work. There's a couple of images. One on the left was from one of the recent COPs. I think it was COP27, where we were pushing around climate finance. And then the one down the bottom was one of the climate marches that many Christians and others take part in during the COP, during the UN climate talks. And so, alongside the devastating news of the impact that is happening, we are also privileged to see positive stories as well, because we also get to see where communities are responding and where there are signs of hope. Communities learning to adapt to their increasingly volatile situations and learning to protect the, sorry, I do apologise for my cough, and learning to protect the environment that they rely on to work in sustainable ways. And one of them is up on the top there. That is an area in Nepal where we are working. And we're supporting a local partner called the International Nepal Fellowship, and they've been working with communities to around this community forest, and they've been planting walnut saplings and regenerating this particular forest area, turning what was their land back into a life-giving, life-supporting forest. And then we also are working in the area of plastic pollution. So this woman on your screen there is Dr. Tiwonge Garba from Malawi, and she is a professor in ecosystems and biodiversity, and she's been working with us as a spokesperson around the issue of plastic waste. And alongside the climate change talks, you may or may not know that there are also now a series of plastic talks. So taking the example of the climate treaties, now governments are coming together in order to agree an agreement, a treaty on plastic pollution. And that's something that we've been involved with right at the start of the negotiations, pushing for some very clear outcomes, and also pushing for the waste pickers to be involved. That's a huge informal economy with people who are, I would say so often, I'm going to say always, ignored in any consideration and discussion around plastic. So we've been working to support the rights of the waste picker economy and bring waste picker leaders into those talks. And Tiwonge is someone who we've been working with as we've been developing that. So there are all sorts of things that are happening. And although I wasn't able to show you a picture of Burima and Mali at the beginning, this now is the community, or one of the communities, that we've been working with in Mali, where Burima lives. And he's been receiving support from Tearfund's local partner there. He's attended training sessions that build up farmers' knowledge about things like alternative composting and plant treatment using local organic products. And he has finally been able to find solutions, positive solutions for his crops at fairly low cost. And thanks to the compost that he's learned to make, he's been able to produce fertile fields that produce good crops. And he's also had a particular improved bean seed introduced to him that is now increasing his crops, and these seeds are better adapted to the climate and to the soils where he lives. And so he is finally able to produce good crops which are helping him and his family. It's a tiny story. It's just one of many other, actually, really hopeful and positive stories of people and churches and communities around the world who are, one, learning to adapt to the realities of the climate crisis, because there is that adaptation that needs to happen. but also are learning how to respond by taking care of the environment that is around them. And that's something we need to learn to do as well, isn't it? These lessons aren't only for a farmer living thousands of miles away in a very different country. Actually, we need to learn from Marima. We are going to have to learn how to adapt to the climate crisis that we're facing. It's going to bring us, who knows, all sorts of challenges that we probably can't imagine quite yet. But it will. We're not going to be immune to what is happening. So we are also going to need to learn to adapt. And as we do so, we need to learn, oh my goodness, how we need to learn how to take care of the world that is around us. That's not only for Marima, that's for us. Do we care for the land that we live on? Do we care for the water that is around us, for our water systems? I was just reading a couple of days ago that a precious chalk stream near where I live has now been officially pronounced dead because of the pollution coming from the water authorities nearby. That is in the South Downs National Park. It's supposed to be a protected chalk stream, a very precious habitat, and yet it's been killed off by polluting activities. Do we care for the water that is near us? Do we care for the trees, for the creatures? What about the other creatures that share our gardens with us? Do we look after our gardens in a way that share that space hospitably with them? Or do we just garden in a way that's for ourselves, putting down loads of slug pellets and tidying everything up and cutting the grass and not leaving things hospitable and open? Do we care about the air that we breathe and the air that other people breathe? Or are we content to drive cars that spew pollution into the air, to fly on lots of holidays and not think about the impact that that's having? All sorts of things that we can be doing in our own lives to take care of the world that is around us. And I also, as I begin to come to an end, just want to highlight some things that we can be doing in our churches as well. This is a Churches Together event, and I would love it if we would all go from here back into our churches and inspire our churches to think about what action could we be taking. And I've got, they're all the same number, aren't they? They're all number one. They're all the most important thing that you could be doing. The formatting somehow didn't quite work as it came across. 5 things that you can be doing in your churches. Firstly, teach and raise awareness. Just the fact of you doing something like this is so good and so important. Are these issues things that you talk about in your churches? Do you have sermons? Do you have small groups around those things? How are you bringing this into the life of your church? Maybe your children's work or whatever it might be, and I'll mention them in a bit, but some of the resources that I've brought are things that will really help you in your churches. These are issues that people care about so much, and it's part of being relevant to the society around us, and particularly relevant to our young people. I've got two sort of growing up daughters, pretty much grown up daughters, and they care deeply, as they should do, about this. And it's important that in our churches that we're being relevant and showing where our faith meets the issues of today. So let's teach. Notice I haven't touched on the theology this evening, or the biblical underpinning to what I'm saying. But I think it's vital that we're helping our congregations understand the faith foundations for thinking and taking action on the climate crisis and other environmental issues. That these things aren't only, in inverted commas, secular concerns, but actually they go right to the heart of what it means to be Christians, to be people who worship the Lord of all creation and who worship the God of justice. These aren't fringe issues. They are central parts of the gospel, of the good news of Jesus Christ. And we can help our congregations to be understanding that and getting that foundation. Secondly, let's pray. I absolutely believe that prayer changes things. And when I look at the situation that we are in today, sometimes I think actually all I can do is get on my knees and pray, God have mercy. Do you know God says, if my people hear, I'm going to quote it wrong, hear his words and repent and get on their knees, what will he do? He says, I will heal. You know? I will heal their land. Yes. If we repent, God will be gracious and will heal our land. So let's pray. Let's pray in our churches as well. So that this is a natural part of our church life. Let's give. I'd love you to give generously this evening so that there's some money left over at the end of this series. The Tearfund, to have a donation. Any money that goes to Tearfund will be well used to support the work that we're doing in this area, but of course in a whole range of other areas as well, responding to disasters and working with churches and their communities to see people lifted out of poverty and to help people lift themselves out of poverty. And I wonder, in your own giving and in your church giving, do you support organisations, mission organisations that have environmental care at the heart of what they're doing? Organisations like Tearfund or like Rochester, you know, let's put our money where our mouth is. And then speaking out. This is such an important part of our church life. We are called to speak up on behalf of those who can't speak for themselves. And we have an opportunity this year, particularly, don't we? We know at some point there will be an election. In fact, you know, globally, this is a really important year. Almost half of the world's population will be voting this year. That's quite staggering, isn't it? That's actually a huge amount of power that we have in our hands. And as it comes to the general election, I would love you to be letting your leaders and your local leaders, your local MP, let them know that climate change is a voting and electoral issue for you. And ask them what they are doing to hold the government to account and to push the government to take action on its Paris climate agreement and the commitments that it made there. Yes, we're interested in other issues as well, but let's get the climate agenda higher up the electoral agenda this year. And we can do that not only as individuals, but as churches too. We could hold hustings. We could write to our MP. We could write to them as a church and say, as a church congregation, we want to know what they're going to do. So we can speak up. And then we can live it out in our own lives. And some of the ways I've touched on, thinking about the food that we eat, the way we travel, the energy we use, the things we throw away, our plastic usage. We can do that in our own lives. And we can do that in our churches as well. Maybe if you hold a church meal together, you could go default veg, which basically means that you have the meal as default vegetarian, but you can let people know if for some particular reason they need to eat meat, to let you know, and they'll cater for that. But the default is that it's vegetable and grain-based, unless someone has a medical reason for needing to eat meat. And then you can explain why you're doing that and what the thinking is behind that. There may well be other things you can do that might be around some of the big things like heating and energy, or thinking about your paper usage, thinking about transport to church. I know that can be tricky. Are there lifts that you can do, or ways that you can encourage people to reduce their car usage? So lots of areas by which we can, as churches, be responding to the climate crisis and wider environmental crises. And if you haven't got involved with Eco-Church, then Eco-Church is a great resource that is there to help your church get engaged. You can get involved with the rubbish campaign. That's the campaign that we're running at Tearfund that's focused on the plastic treaties that are coming up. Check out our Restorative Revolution report. That's something new that we've just launched, and it's a vision for our society, and a vision to bring together a movement of the church to transform wealth and power and communities in order to bring about a flourishing world. You can find that very easily online. You can just put in just put Tearfund Restorative Revolution, you will find that. And there are accompanying Bible studies there as well. Let me finish by just telling you about the resources that are over on the table there that I've brought really to help you. I hope this evening is interesting. But if it's not, I apologise. If it's only interesting, then that's a waste of time, and you might as well have just stayed in and watched the television. I really hope that you will go from here and do something as a result of this evening, and as a result of the whole series over the next few weeks. And so I brought my books, which are here because they will help you take the small snippets that we've just been able to cover very briefly this evening and go away and do some more things. So let me tell you what is over on the table over there. There's Just Living, Faith and Community in an Age of Consumerism. And that looks at the issue of consumerism, our consumer society, and looks at how can we be followers of Jesus, effective followers of Jesus in our community, in our society that is so focused on consumerism. And it's an exploration of our contemporary society, and then of how we live in it well as followers of Jesus. L is for Lifestyle is a really practical book. It goes through the alphabet, takes an issue for each letter. I'll leave you to guess, see if you can guess all the different issues. Each chapter is very short. I sometimes call it a toilet book. You could put it in the toilet, you might be able to read a chapter in a sitting. I'll leave you to think whether that's possible. Each chapter is very short, just takes an issue, looks at it, and then finishes with 2 or 3 very clear action points, so you can go and do something practical about it. And then saying Yes to Life is what was the Archbishop of Canterbury's Lent book, and that is a perfect resource for you in your churches. So it was a Lent book, so it was designed in 6 chapters and has got discussion questions at the end. It doesn't have to be ready groups, you can read it as an individual as well. But if you're wanting something to engage your church, then that's a really good one to use. And also, if you're wanting something that really explores the biblical, the faith side and that biblical theology, then I would pick that one up. And then, possibly my favourite, Planet Protectors, 52 Ways to Look After God's World. You can probably tell straight away that that is for primary school aged children. And I co-wrote it with Paul Carenza, who's a comedian and a BBC scriptwriter. And it's fun, it's quirky, nonetheless challenging for that. But it's got 52 very short little chapters, all illustrated throughout, and it's perfect for your kids, your grandkids, your children's church, whatever it is. And then the final two are hot off the press, and they are two Bible studies for small group use. One on the book of Proverbs, and one exploring wider themes of justice in the Bible and some particular contemporary issues. So there's a whole load of resources that are there to help you take away from this evening and think more, explore more, and live it out in your own lives. There are some, and I have to get into a sales mode, there's a fantastic offer. If you get the four first books, you can have a brilliant deal on them that costs even less than buying three. So do have a look at those, and they're all reduced, so would love you. They're not to make money, although any money does go to Tearfund, they're there because I want to resource you and help you beyond this evening. Right, thank you for your attention and your patience with me. I hope it's been helpful and interesting, and I think we'll be going on to some questions.
Well done.
Right, just give you a few moments to think about the questions. Thank you, Ruth, for your talk and for giving us lots to think about it for our first occasion of meeting this year. I've got one mic, so are you going to be the rover, Ken?
No one can.
So it might keep you warm. If people ask questions, can you wait for the mic to come to you, and then I won't have to repeat the question because I won't have a mic.
Thank you. You talked about, you mentioned about working closely with Christian Aid and Cathedral. Do you see that it's necessary to have three distinct organisations like that, all working really with a similar remit of a Christian faith as kind of inspiration and whatever, or should more be done to actually bring those three organisations together? What do you think about that?
I think the need is so great that we need as many people and as many organisations involved. And I don't think that being in one organisation would actually make us more effective, because we often reach into different constituencies. So of course CAFOD is the arm that works primarily with Catholics, and so they reach into a wing of the church that we wouldn't so much as Tearfund, and Tearfund and Christian Aid really complement each other in reaching across the breadth of the church. And there is, so I think we're needed because we reach different areas, and quite often we're maybe working on the same issue but from a slightly different perspective, and so one might be working on climate finance and someone else working on a different, on fossil fuels or something, and so we can work together and complement each other. What is important is that we do collaborate, and that we're not rivals. And we don't see ourselves in that way at all. There's really, really good cross-working between us, and we at that organisational level, we work quite strategically. We'll sort of work together on a committee and look at what are the different parts that we can play. So yeah, it's a really good question. I understand the question behind, the heart behind it.
Ruth, thank you for what you've shared with us, for the work that you and Tearfund are doing on so many levels. I'm part of the Church of England Diocese of Bristol's Net Zero Advisory Group, having some oversight of the work that our diocese is doing to take forward its commitment to be net zero by 2030. And it feels as if there is some good work going on and substantive change will be achieved. But I think a number of us have become frustrated really that net zero is being seen as a technical challenge to be met rather than a matter of whole lived discipleship. We wrote some emails after our last meeting, and I've had a question posed to me, which I'd like to pose to you. It would be great to hear your thoughts on what the blockers are for this lack of lived discipleship in terms of living discipleship. Is that a lack of knowledge or interest, do you feel are blockers to getting this message across?
Thank you. And I can understand the frustration of the technical side of net zero. It can come across in that technical way, can't it? And is where I love what Eco Church does and holding that together with net zero. Net zero is hugely important, and we absolutely have to work towards that. Eco Church, I think, has that slightly more holistic and maybe less scary approach when net zero does sound very technical. Which isn't to say that we shouldn't be giving ourselves wholeheartedly to that, but I think those things they can complement each other. I will come back to the first point on my church's slide around teaching and raising awareness in our churches. I think for too long we just haven't shown in our churches how these issues are part of the faith. So you wouldn't dream of having a church who didn't pray. That's just a natural part of what church does, and we understand that. You wouldn't dream of having a church that doesn't reach out to its local community, and we understand that, and that's what a church does. And I would love us to get to that point where you wouldn't dream of having a church that isn't engaged in caring for the natural world in some way. Because that's just what church does, because we understand when we read our Bibles, when we think theologically, of course you would, it just goes right to the heart of our Christian faith. That is a theological issue, isn't it? Even theological makes it sound too complicated. It's just a Bible thing, isn't it? It's a biblical issue, understanding that this amazing world has been created by a God who looks at it and says, oh dear, and says it's very good, says it's fantastic. And so I would love us to be finding ways to be building in that biblical understanding into our churches, so it just becomes second nature to who we are as Christians. That will take a while, and that will take leadership from our leaders for that to happen.
I think I've got.
Hi. I just wanted to sort of talk a little bit more on the first thing, that's just about wanting more collaboration, like collaboration and actually mergers together of organisations. But I just don't feel it. Certainly when I worked in the Northeast Congo, I did feel there was a lack of collaboration between organisations. So I think now with climate change, it's all very intertwined. Offer obviously a coordinated body, but ultimately did invite all stakeholders to meetings. So it's about trying to bring them together. Cathedral might have clinics, church, the elite church type, different organisations doing similar things, but not coordinating. I just choose to on the ground. It's very difficult to move around, in, especially the rainy season. So, and then obviously like level of communication we've got, and stuff. So I just wonder how much work has been done proactively, sort of faith-based organisations on the ground, particularly Christians who are doing similar things. And for example, AMRAC, I think some organisations look at sort of their deliverance clinics being more sustainable with solar power. So, kind of, is it becoming more joined up? I feel like I've been in the field for a while, so I'm just interested, I assume that you've been in the field recently.
Are you meaning on the ground in the countries where we're serving? Yeah, so I can only talk from a Tearfund perspective. I can't talk from the whole wider NGO space. Certainly from Tearfunds, and we always work with other people and other organisations, and that's just part of how we work. Excuse me. And we always work with and through the local church. So Tearfund, unless there's an absolutely rapid onset disaster, though even in that situation, generally not, Tearfund never goes in and just does its own thing, builds a school or gives mosquito nets or something. We always work with the churches that are there on the ground, and we work with denominations and with church networks, might be the Anglican Church or local church networks. So, and often you won't know that it's Tearfund that's behind that work, because we don't have, Range Rovers with our names on it. In most of the countries, in some of the countries where we're doing real, I guess you'd call it hardcore humanitarian work in refugee camps. I was thinking, I was in the DRC last year and went and saw some of the work that we're doing in some of the refugee camps there. There you might see Tearfund's name. But the on-the-ground long-term development work is all done through partners, local organisations, churches. So none of it is Tearfund on its own, it's always working with others. And a lot of the humanitarian work that we do is done in consortiums as well. So we often, this is getting sort of technical now, so forgive me, but if we're bidding for work, say from USAID, we will do that with other organisations. So, and I'm sure that's for others outside of Tearfund as well. But anyone with any common sense knows that you work better when you work with other people and you're more effective. So, but like I said, I can't speak for everybody, but that's Tearfund's way of working.
A superficial glance at the audience at the back of my head. The estimate is the age range is owned might be middle-aged. In our congregation, I tried to attract some of the young ones and students, clearly without success. So it does seem to me that one of our problems, you have attracted people who are middle-aged, but it seems that the students and schools, there's one for our primary schools, but should the campaign not be towards universities and secondary schools who are really kind of coming in to activities that is concerned about?
Yes, and we need organisations working in all the different spaces, and that is one of the things about our churches, why we need to be talking about the issues that are relevant to our younger people, and I'm very aware of that issue. We did some research a few years ago that resulted in a report called Burning Down the House. You might like to have a look at it later. And we surveyed Christian teenagers And of the teenagers who we surveyed, 9 out of 10 said they felt very strong on that climate crisis. Only 1 in 10 thought that their church was doing anything about it. So there's this real mismatch. So yeah, it's a challenge for us.
Worry.
We've got a question from a young person. I think.
I'm not quite sure that's the age, but
No.
I have a question about Christian communities around the world who are like directly impacted by climate change today. When they know that it's not going to get worse because of things changing at the moment, how does that impact their relationship to God? How do they view God in that?
Thank you. I can't actually hear what you're saying. There's something about you can probably hear that really well. There's something about where I'm standing. I can't always hear the acoustics from the questioner. Are you, sorry, we're not wanting to bring you on the spot.
There was an echo, we couldn't hear the question.
So my question is about Christian communities who are directly impacted by climate change and who knows that it's going to get worse in the future years. And the question was how does that impact their relationship with God and how they view God?
Yeah, thank you. Gosh, I think so. How does that impact their relationship with God? It's a brilliant question, and I don't think I can answer that or speak for those communities. I do know that the times that I have spent with communities that are in a very different economic situation to me and facing the impact of climate change much more bluntly than I am always overwhelmed by their, I won't say joy, which sounds a bit crazy. Joy, it's either joy or positivity, and I'm not sure that positivity is quite the right word. But also their very real assessment of the situation. I think of a lovely young farmer who I spent the day with in Tanzania in one of the poorest areas and spent the day on his homestead with his wife and his little 4-year-old daughter and my colleague. And he wanted to show us around his land and what he was doing. He knew that he was facing massive challenges, and he wasn't unaware of that. He could see that his crops weren't growing as much as they should be, and yet he was incredibly resilient and so hard-working and hospitable. And we sat under his mango tree and he got his guitar out and we sang worship songs together. And his wife brought us out some food and drink, and it was just incredibly humbling. So that's just one person who I've met, but I don't think in general I could talk on behalf of others. Others, of course, are desperate when you talk to them, because they know what's happening and they feel utterly powerless. They are utterly powerless to do anything about it. Yeah, thank you. It's a really interesting question.
More questions? Chris.
Thanks. Yes, I'd like to ask a bit more about some of the recent questions. The one, for example, about what the sort of resistance to action and recognition in the church and maybe wider. I think sometimes people in the church and beyond feel easily a sense of hopelessness and helplessness. That can lead to a despair and a sense of, well, what can we do? I think also, alongside that, it's us in the older generation and before us who are very responsible for a lot of the climate crisis, certainly a big contribution to it. Alongside that, it's the young people who are faced with the future more than we are. And I wonder sometimes if there are ways in which we see in the news some of the disasters and things, but it's often presentations like this where we hear some of the seeds of hope of what actions can be done and how they can be supported. And I wonder if there's any way that this can happen more widely, so that people are then really empowered to feel they can do something and it does make a difference, even if it's a drop in the ocean.
And that's one of the lovely things of the Attenborough series, that, you know, they've always been finishing with showing things that people are doing and giving that voice, that note of hope amidst all the devastation as well. So it comes through a bit in some of the programmes, but you're right. And actually, I was talking to a leader from Australia who I mentioned earlier today, and she's doing some thinking and writing about some stuff, and we were talking about hope and whether there is hope. And I said, well, there is hope, but only if we act. And so the onus is on us to act individually, but most importantly as governments and businesses. And that's where we really have got to use our voices to push governments and businesses to take those big changes that will lead to the big systemic changes. When I think of what got us into this mess, which is lots of individual things that individuals haven't done, plus lots of crazy policies from governments and crazy practices from businesses, you think, well, actually, if all of that can get us here, then all of that could get us back again. Or not back again, but could take us forward in a different direction. But we have got to act. And where we are at is that every fraction of a degree still matters. So we are at a certain place where we are beyond a point of being able to roll things back. We are in a climate crisis now. It's not the case of there's a climate crisis coming and if we take action we can stop it. We knew that. I was saying that 30 years ago. And the fact is we haven't acted and we are in a climate crisis. But the response isn't to throw our hands up and say, okay, well, because we've got over to here, therefore there's no point doing anything. Because still, the more we act now, the least worse it'll be in years to come. So still, every fraction of a degree matters. And still, every action that we take positively matters. And every positive policy that the government puts in matters, etc., etc. So there is still hope, and we have to live that out.
Maybe one more? Maybe two more. A quick one. Really quick, please. Oh, Ken says one.
A fascinating thought, thank you. We seem to live in a world that possesses speed and hurry. And ultimately, the church tries to get us to slow down and have time to reflect. But the voice of the secular getting more and more in a hurry would be heard more clearly than the voice of the church to slow down.
Thank you. I don't think I need to respond to that. There's been called for all of us to slow down and not hurry, and let's slow down and notice the trees and the birds and the flowers and the natural world, because as we start to notice that and to appreciate what's around us, then we will be inspired enough to take care of the other creatures that we're sharing this world with, and all the beings, tree beings,